All right, I'm talking to do you go by professor?
So I mean, my students call me Dr. Goodin. You can call me whatever you want, but
Yeah,
Dr. Goodin is
I'll
kind
just
of
call
like
you Jacob.
the
Yeah.
branded name, the teacher name, but
Yeah,
whatever.
I don't like it. I like when my students just call me Will, honestly. So I'll just
Yeah.
call you Jacob, but PhD, Professor, Dr. Gooden. Um, okay, so I wanted to talk to you like we were saying right before we started recording. So you're professor. What's the school you're at? I can't even
So
pronounce it.
yeah, no, I'm at Point Loma, Nazarene University. It's in San Diego, right on the ocean, on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific. So, if
Yeah, it
you
looks like it's a
come out
cool
and visit,
area.
we'll host you there.
Yeah. Yeah, so I want to talk to you about your experience because, like I was saying before we hit record, so I was in strength and conditioning as a coach for I think 7 or 8 years, and now I took this job in academics. So now I'm teaching. I'm in the kinesiology department at UND teaching. So it's still like the same kind of content, I guess. Like I'm basically teaching CSCS prep, kind of that's the content that I'm in charge of. And I know you've stated before that you used to be a strength and conditioning coach too before
Yeah,
you got into
yeah,
academics, is that
yeah.
right?
So I can go into that too if you want, if that's helpful.
Yeah, if just because my audience, I know we have a lot of like kinesiology students or people that want to get into kinesiology of some sort, whether it's phy ed, strength and conditioning coaches, personal training, whatever it is, that kind of whole
Mhm.
umbrella of strength conditioning, fitness, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I want to hear your experience, kind of like from maybe from undergrad, because I know you're married, you have a couple of kids, you've been in it for a decent amount of time.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you could kind of share your experience, and I'll probably interject maybe a little bit too much and annoy you with follow-up questions. So bear with me if I do that. But yeah, just go ahead and like give us your experience, kind of where you started, how you ended up where you're at now.
Oh, for sure. Okay, so man, if we're gonna go all the way back, and actually, hold on my sorry, Will, my audio stopped capturing for me. Give me just like 2 seconds here. I think
Ah.
this is gonna work. I like to think I'm good at tech now after doing this for so long, but obviously I just screwed up most of the time. Um, so okay, I'm gonna just hope that this is capturing and I can clean it up in post. I don't know why it's testing 1, 2, 3. Sorry. We we can maybe cut this from the thing.
Okay.
Come on. Audio input capture. Why is this? No. USB digital audio. Oh, wireless. Is this it? There we go. Okay. Okay, sweet. Okay, we're going.
All right.
We're good. All right, to answer your question, yeah. So back to the first part of the question, strength and conditioning. So I graduated with my exercise science degree from Westmont College after having been an athlete. So I was a miler in college. That was my primary event. So track and field, and then cross country as well. So anything from 800 to the 1500. And that was really my sweet spot. But then also I raced cross country and I did fairly well. And at the NAIA level there as well, I had anchor the 4x4 team, so I had a bit of speed. And but the thing is, we didn't do any strength and conditioning on our team for the distance runners. My coach, amazing coach, really great man, and one of my biggest mentors, even to this day. But just he didn't have a background in strength and conditioning, and we didn't have a strength coach, dude. We didn't have a strength coach at our, little NAIA college.
Is
And
that in
so,
California?
what was that?
Is it in California, the
Yes,
school?
in Santa Barbara, California. So,
Okay.
beautiful Santa Barbara. I grew up in Washington State, and they got me with pictures of the beach and promises of
Yeah.
sunshine. And so I sustained some injuries in college. I ran 351 as a sophomore, got hurt, was able to match it off of greatly reduced training the next year. And then the injuries continued to progress. So I continued to look into, hey, how can I actually improve my not only try to heal these injuries and rehab them, which seem to not really be working, but fix my biomechanics and maybe what can I do pain free? How can I continue to train off of the track outside of all the miles on the road to improve my performance? And so that's where I started to experiment with strength and conditioning, to experiment with plyos, with sort of prehab, rehab type exercises. I went through all of the phases of I think a young sort of movement professional strength coach type person that they would go through, where it's like, you get obsessed with how the hips are working and all these glute activation drills, and you get obsessed with foot strike biomechanics or kinematics, and then you get obsessed with the perfect drills to, optimize your technique. And then I started actually just lifting and looking at like metabolic conditioning in the weight room. So circuit training and trying to figure out, okay, how can I stimulate high lactate production or steady lactate production, not running, not doing tempos, not doing repeat intervals. And I got to the point where I found just like the sweet spot for me at the time, because I could only do about 10 miles a week of volume, which is, abysmally low for a distance runner. And all of that had to be running fast on the track and spikes, because biomechanically that was the only thing that my ankle could handle, which seems weird, like higher forces, but it's just because the way that I run, I tend to overpronate, and I used to overstride quite a bit. Someone when I was really young told me, hey, if you take bigger steps, you're going to run faster. And I took that to heart as a kid. And I think that messed me up. And it didn't really come back to bite me until, like I was saying, like around 20 years old. And so I have pretty severe tendinopathies in both ankles, in the posterior tibialis. Anyways, long story short, that's what sparked my interest and passion in human performance. And then I did an internship during my senior year in college at Prevail Conditioning, this private strength and conditioning slash group fitness outfit in Santa Barbara. They're still there. I just spoke with Pete, the owner, a couple weeks ago. I, sent him an intern who's now working there, so it's pretty cool, first full circle moment. But that was amazing. Really, really, they really poured into me as like this know nothing kind of, 22-year-old skinny distance runner with no formal resistance training background, never been coached in it. And Pete, and then also Chris Eklund, the owner at the time, they just poured into me and the other interns, and taught us regressions and progressions and movement strategies and how to do warm-ups and all of this stuff. And in the meet at the same time, I was studying for my CSCS. And I didn't actually end up taking my CSCS though until like 4 or 5 years later, because it was just so expensive, and I was working like four
Yeah.
jobs to just to make it in Santa Barbara. So I did that for a couple of years, strength and conditioning, group fitness classes. I was a head high school track and field coach as well. I worked as a PT aide in a clinic, and then when I went back to grad school at under Dr. Mike Stone in ETSU, uh, from day one, we were with teams. And so the Division I teams are at ETSU, the strength and conditioning staff for them is actually the grad student. And so from day one, I was a mentee under one of the older grad students who was in the PhD program. Although it didn't always work out, older versus younger depends on how old you were when you started. Um, but so the PhD students were essentially like the head strength coaches for each individual team, and then the master students were the assistants. And so we all got to sort of get experience with all of the teams there. But for myself in particular, it was like 90% women's and men's tennis. That eventually, once I was, I think my second year of my master's, or maybe the first year of my PhD, I was the head for those. And then we also did the sports science for all of those teams as well. And then we also had another university across town, Milligan College, a small NAIA school that we had sent our students over there to be the strength and conditioning coaches for as well. And so those are my collegiate sort of strength and conditioning experience roles. I've also done, here and there, like early on when I was in Santa Barbara, assistant for a high school football team. A lot of like one-off kind of shorter gigs, as you know, like in the private space where you have people for 8 weeks or 12 weeks. I worked with my alma mater with their track and field team, or well, cross country team really, for a little bit. I forget if it was 2 or 3 semesters. Um, so yeah, like really a smattering of there was some consistency during some periods of it, quite a lot of breadth though as well. So, and I've gotten to work with, um, athletes from middle school all the way up to collegiate and then professional as well as Olympic when they would come in and test with us. And so that's less so of, seeing them day in, day out as a coach, more so coming in under, let's say, one of my professors or mentors who they were the actual coach for the athlete. And then we would get to just sort of be the assistants or, the GAs working with those athletes and then run their sports science testing. And then we also did that with they had an Olympic development weightlifting team as well at ETSU. So yeah, that kind of encapsulates it up until, when I graduated from ETSU and then made the trek out here to California.
So that was basically through your master's degree? Or
Master's
was
and
that through your
PhD.
PhD and your
Yeah.
PhD? Okay.
Yeah, so I did 2 years in just the private sector after I graduated, which was, I think, really fundamental and foundational because I got a completely different set of sort of skills and applied coaching skills. And then when I went to grad school, it was a very different coaching paradigm. So that was another 5 years. Yeah, so seven in total. And then I matriculated from that PhD program, and then I've been here in San Diego now for 7 years.
So, upon completing your PhD, did you get into academics like as a professor right away, or is there some sort of a gap between doing something else or still coaching?
Yeah, so I knew, so I went to grad school thinking I wanted to be a track and field coach. I thought I'm going to get my master's, and I went to ETSU because that was the only place that had a master's and a PhD because I didn't know. I was like 50-50 if I wanted to continue and get my PhD. But the only place that had a PhD in sport performance specifically at the time. So strength and power sports, strength and conditioning, sports science, all of that. And pretty quickly in the master's program, I realized, well, I think I'm going to want to do a PhD. And my aspirations switched from wanting to be a track and field coach to wanting to be a strength and conditioning coach. And then in my first year as a PhD student, it switched again. And I realized, I think, because we were having kids, I think Braden, our youngest, was born. He was like born very conveniently so that I didn't have to take a midterm for one of my courses. But we had three kids and they were all born by the first year of my PhD, I believe. And so I realized, life as a strength and conditioning coach, there's going to be a lot of moving and very long hours. So I kind of switched over to teaching. And then I realized, I love teaching because teaching and coaching honestly, they're very
Yeah,
similar. There's
yeah.
obviously differences, but yeah, like you're just figuring out different ways to impart information as efficiently as possible to, get the students or to get the athletes to be proficient in executing the skill or the knowledge or the movement, whatever it is, and especially teaching in kinesiology because so much of it is movement based. And so that's really when I decided I wanted to teach. And so for the last 2 years of my PhD program, I knew I'm going back into academia. And in the last year, really, I was applying all over the country. So yeah, yeah. So I went right into academia.
Was it tough getting a teaching job?
It was in the sense that I applied to about 40 different schools. My wife and I in that last year we were both praying like that God would bring us to wherever he wanted us. We're like, you know what, if it's some small podunk town in the middle of nowhere, we're open to it. But we really did at that point want to get back to the West Coast. We kind of went through these phases of leaving the West Coast and being like, okay, this is a new chapter, a new season. Missing it intensely for the first year or two while we were in Tennessee, then getting to the point where we're like, yeah, we're open to wherever. And then in the last year, we actually realized, you know what, we actually really want to get back to California, somewhere sunny by the coast, but we were open to anything. So yeah, that I applied everywhere, just shotgun blasts all over the country and had quite a number of interviews. Some schools didn't call me back. Some schools I made it through the first interview and then they didn't call me back. Some I made it on campus and that either got a job offer uh, or not a job offer. And then others in the process, I realized as I was going through the interviews, like, I don't think this school's for me. I don't think this is going to be a good fit for our family. And so, it was a lot of kind of anxiety in that process because it's a
Sure.
lot to move, for other human beings. With Point Loma, though, it was gosh, just from the first phone call, it really was evident that this school was going to be a really good fit for us. And so it became my top pick and my wife's top choice for where to move our family pretty quickly. And we're just super blessed that it seemed like it was all yeses as we went through the process.
So what's your current title there, and has the title changed since year one?
Yeah, so the current title is Professor of Kinesiology. I keep just, throwing out little hints like, hey, could we change my title to like Professor of Sports Science or like Director of Human Performance or like something cooler, but no, it's Professor of Kinesiology. When I got here, I was an assistant professor. And for those who don't know, in the US sort of academic system, you can be an instructor, or you can be like adjunct, and then that's like part-time work, teaching classes here and there. Then instructor, and that's usually part-time or full-time instructor. Then if you have a tenure track position, then it you start as an assistant professor, which is what I
Yeah.
started. You go assistant, associate, and then full. And so I've made those two jumps, and I think next year will be my first year as a full professor of kinesiology. But I don't know yet if you say full before it, like in a title. I think you just say professor of kinesiology and just let people figure it out.
You got your tenure.
And I got tenure as well, yes. So that
Uh,
was this last year that I got that.
for the requirements to become tenure, did you have to publish a certain amount of research? What was like the process of getting that?
Yeah, so it's different at every university, and some universities are moving away from the tenure system. I'm glad that we're not. I think for all of the potential flaws in a tenure system, I think there's a lot of benefits as well, as long as there's good checks and balances. And so at Point Loma, we are a very, very teaching-oriented university, and so actually the publication bar is very low, and it's something that you know, I I see a lot of my colleagues publishing very frequently and in high impact journals, and sometimes I feel a little bit of like, played the comparison game where I'm like, oh man, my publication record is not very strong. But you know what? I focus so much time and effort on teaching and on teaching as well as I can, and running our sports science program as well. And so it's just something that I
Oh,
have to, I'm like, okay, I got to let that go. But we are required to publish in, I forget how many journals per cycle of tenure review or of promotion. I think it's just one actually per year. It's either one per year or one per cycle, but then we have to have a number of student partnered research projects as well. So a big majority of what I do is have students who are doing their capstone or thesis projects, and they have this quite intensive research experience that they go through, and we write it up and we submit an abstract to a conference and we bring a poster or even an oral presentation if it's good enough for that, and we'll go to the NSCA conference. Or I have a couple students who also are on the biomechanics side, and so they go to the biomechanics conferences. I have a student a couple students actually on some research I'm presenting in Europe at the European College of Sports Science this summer. So most of it is that type of thing. And then I have a few peer-reviewed publications, and most of those also are as second, third, fourth, last author. I have PhD students who I also mentor from other universities. And if I'm on, let's say, their dissertation project, and on the way to that dissertation, sometimes they're publishing, or after they've defended, sometimes they have, follow-up research that I can help with, whether it's running stats, helping with the writing, producing figures, that type of thing.
so is part of your designated role or responsibility to advise grad students and PhD students as they're working on their thesis or whatever their capstone project is? Is that part of your role, like a requirement
Yeah.
for you?
Yep, that's a big part of it. And so my teaching load is actually split 50-50 undergrad.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask
So
about that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So 50% is all undergrad students, and there's not a lot of research there, although some of them choose, a very small percent choose to do an honors thesis project, and sometimes I've mentored those. On the grad side, they don't have to do a research project. They could take the comprehensive exams, but I would say, I don't know, probably about 50% of our master students choose to do a capstone or thesis. And so part of my teaching load does come from overseeing those.
What's the difference between a capstone and a thesis?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you can think of a capstone like a thesis light. So a
Okay.
thesis, if that's
Because
going to
I
be
because I did for undergrad for me, I did a capstone, and then for my
right.
master's, it was a thesis, and they seemed like it was the same thing to me.
Hmm. And so it depends on how the university has it set up. For us, a thesis, you're going to have an official proposal, a formal proposal of your project. You're going to have 3 to 4 people on your committee. And then there's a more rigorous review process, and it has to be a project that has viable publication possibility, right? So you need to get sufficient sample size with an actual research-based project. You have to actually write up the full manuscript as if you were going to publish to a journal. For a
But you don't
cap
have to follow through, right? You don't have to
you
follow
don't
through.
have
It
to.
has to
No,
be
not
yeah.
to actually defend. Although we tried our best to keep it as if you're going to publish, because I think that intent helps drive better outcomes, and then it's
Yeah.
much more likely that the student can publish at the end. For
Yeah. It
capstone, they
incentivizes
can do
better
that.
work.
Yeah, oh yeah, totally. It incentivizes better work. For a capstone, they can do that, or they could do a more applied project. Like it could be, I had a student design a strength and conditioning and wellness plan for firefighters, or I had a student write up essentially his coaching guide to soccer athletes because he was a soccer coach first and was doing our master's program as well. And so everything from, physical prep to recovery to how it applied to the actual game, the way that they played it. So they can be more applied for us as a capstone project.
Okay. Dude, I apologize. I just got this notification saying we only have 10 minutes. I don't have the upgraded Zoom, so I apologize for
Oh,
that.
oh, good.
So,
I
uh
can send one back, or we can also do this again another time because
yeah,
I just goes on
let's
forever.
do this again, but so okay. I want to ask you something. I'll keep an eye on this clock here and just let you know. So with your role as a teacher, so 50% is teaching. Is that like was that 9 credits a semester that you have to do?
Yeah, so it's actually well, it's 100% of my teaching is divided into 50% undergrad and 50% grad, and so
Okay. And
yeah,
a
it's
lot of
about
it
it's about
is a lot
12
most of
per.
it is most of it lab based, or are you like lecturing too? Like how is that split up?
Most of my courses are lecture,
Okay.
and then I choose to use class time in the lab. And when I say lab, I mean in the weight room. But one or two of one course we're switching, I actually have through the Cascade accreditation that we were chatting about just before this, going through accreditation with the NSCA, I'm actually adding a lab portion to my strength and conditioning course, which is going to be phenomenal. And then my sports science course on the grad side, we also have a lab for that as well.
All right. Okay. Follow up to that. What is okay? So strength and conditioning, I think everyone kind of understands what that is. But sports science, is that where you're looking at force plate data, catapult data, that kind of stuff? Like, what's the distinction between those two classes?
Yeah, that's part of it for sure, a big part of it. And force plates, GPS, load monitoring, that's probably a big distinction that people see on the outside. Coding and data visualization would be the other one. But, really sports science, if you distill it down and differentiate it from strength and conditioning, um, sports science is leveraging all of the scientific disciplines to drive performance forward. And you could contrast that with exercise science. Exercise science is using exercise to better understand biology or to better understand physiology, right? And so there's a different goal for each of those. For sports science, the goal is really to drive performance in by every means possible, by any means possible. And one of those means, one very important means to that end is strength and conditioning. And so in exercise science, you could think of sort of the service component, the actionable component for athletics as either wellness to general pop or strength and conditioning to athletes. Of course, you can strength and condition gen
Yeah.
pops, but I would include wellness. I would include resistance training into wellness. In sports science, strength and conditioning also flows out of that because that's one aspect of how we improve performance. But then the other major arm is going to be testing and monitoring the things that you mentioned, force plate testing, load monitoring via GPS, and a host of other things. And so, sports science, functionally, if you have if you had a line of demarcation and said this is a sports scientist and this is a strength coach, um, and their roles were separate, actually there's a lot of overlap of understanding because your strength coach might be using force plates in the weight room, and your sports scientist needs to understand training paradigms and recovery time horizons and stimuli and fatigue monitoring and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a huge overlap. And so I try to teach my students to be both, right? And that's kind of what I how I was trained, um, where sports science really rose out of two different fields. It's like if a strength coach and a computer scientist or coder, data viz type person like had a baby, and that's a sports scientist. And so you have a lot of people who have a foot in both worlds. And so that's how we try to equip our students by and large. Of course, some are going to gravitate much more towards strength and conditioning, and some are clearly much more on the like data science side of sports science. But for even our nerdiest of sports scientists who are always just at the computer writing code, etc., I'm like, hey, get in the weight room. You got to be training, and they're taking those classes formally. But I make sure that they have also the training experience too. Just like for our strength and conditioning students, I'm like, hey, you have to at least understand Excel and you have to understand, how to make these data visualizations. You need to know the technology as well, because it's a very integrated world. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, so it would the strength and conditioning classes or class, would that be a prereq to get into sports science, or is strength and conditioning undergrad and sports science graduate school?
Good question. You can actually do it either way at Point Loma. So at the undergrad side, we have a strength and conditioning concentration, and that gets you prepared for the CSCS. And then you could matriculate into our grad program. And
Yeah.
because you already have your CSCS, you would go into the sports science program, or you could choose biomechanics or exercise phys. If you exercise phys would be like the clinical route of exercise physiology. Biomechanics is obviously biomechanics, or sports science. If a student comes in as a master's student from somewhere else and they come in, they could choose to either do strength and conditioning as a grad student or any of the other aforementioned programs. On the undergrad side, you can go directly into, sports science as an undergrad student, but really that certification, like the NSCA has their new CPSS certification, Certified Performance and Sports Scientist, and that's the first sports science um, credential of its kind. And so that's really geared more toward the graduate level. So someone who has their master's already. And so if students are going to do that, I say, hey, let's do the strength and conditioning program anyways, because you have to know all this stuff. Then
Yeah.
come to our grad program for a year, and then you take your CPSS. So in 5 years, they'll have also their CSCS and their CPSS, and they'll have their master's. So that really sets you up very well for success.
Do you track okay, how do I word this? For your students that go through your strength and conditioning program, are all of them going into the program with the intention of taking the CSCS?
So the strength and conditioning concentration is actually new. We created that in order to meet the new regulations by the NSCA to get CASCI accreditation. And for those like who might not know when I say a CASCI accreditation, basically the NSCA has spawned out of the NSCA is this thing called CASCI, which I forget the acronym, like Council on something something Strength and Conditioning Education.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
should
then
know, but I don't.
I know, right? There's too many acronyms. And so by 2030, all programs um, that will matriculate students to then out of that program to then take the CSCS exam will have to be CASCI accredited, which is a really big deal.
Big deal. Yeah.
There's a lot of gatekeeping there. And so
Yeah.
yeah, and so in order to meet those guidelines, we created a strength and conditioning specific concentration. And now I forget your original question. But yeah, so it's new. So we actually don't have any students yet in that pathway. Next year will be the first year for it. And it'll probably take a year or two to spin up. I do get a lot of most of my students actually who become uh, passionate about strength and conditioning, they start off wanting to be a physical therapist or a PA because that's what their parents know are good jobs and that's what they hear. And no, and probably because there's no accreditation yet for strength and conditioning. Now that there is, I think it's going to elevate the field, but time will tell.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. All right, we only have a minute 30 left, so I'm gonna hit uh stop on the recording. So everyone who stayed and watched this whole thing, go follow Jacob's YouTube channel. He puts out like legit educational content, not just like your typical kind of YouTube fitness, YouTube strength and conditioning education content. He puts like real lectures on there. So go follow it if you want to like get, I don't know, real legit information, not just the kind of shit that I post on here. So go follow him, Jacob. I appreciate your time. We're gonna for sure. I'm gonna follow up with you on this for sure because I want to extend this conversation. So yeah, I'm just hit record. Thanks for paying attention, guys, and watching this whole thing. So I'll hit